Welcome to the video. This is a video 5 for the Door Supervision Refresher E-Learning. You have to watch this video. This is a mandatory requirement, and you have to do the multiple choice questions at the end of watching this video. You can rewind this video as many times as you like. Why it's mandatory? Because we are not going to cover this content during the class. So module 1, we're going to cover understanding physical interventions and the implications of their use. Let's have a look at this. Now, what is physical intervention? What is it? Physical intervention is the use of direct or indirect force through bodily, physical, or mechanical means to limit another person's movement. Okay, so the use of direct or indirect force through bodily, physical, or mechanical means to limit another person's movement. Why do we do that? What are the risks involved? We'll cover it. Now, physical intervention skills include guides, deflections, blocks, escorting holds, disengagement techniques, and restraints. Okay, obviously, this is only the theoretical part. When you come to the class, you will be taught how to deal with it physically as well. Okay, but these are some of the things that included in the physical intervention: guides, deflections, blocks, escorting holds, disengagement techniques, and restraints. Now, what are defensive physical skills? Now, defensive physical skills are methods used to protect oneself and or others from unlawful assault. Okay, methods used to protect oneself and or others from unlawful assault. Okay, so that's one thing. And then defensive physical skills enables you. What enables you to do? Recognize danger. So you do dynamic risk assessment, avoid it, avoid and manage it and react to it safely using the safe techniques that we will teach you in the classroom. Okay, so I'm going to repeat it again. Defensive physical skills enable you to recognize danger, avoid it, manage it, and react to it safely. Now, physical defensive skills. First, it includes risk assessment. So you have to do a dynamic risk assessment. What is dynamic risk assessment? On the go risk assessment, where you are doing a risk assessment in a changing environment. Okay, so you do the risk assessment, then you can call for support, make sure you are in a proper position, you can take a stance, and then your communication skills. You need to have best communication skills or proper communication skills. You need to know about the boundaries, any barriers, and exit routes. Okay, so defensive physical skills include all of that. You do the risk assessment, you call for support, your positioning, your stance, your communication skills, because physical intervention, you only need to use it as a last resort. Okay, physical intervention can only be used as a last resort. Now let's have a look at what is the difference between the defensive physical skills and physical intervention. So what is the difference between defensive physical skills and physical intervention? So the first is to use to protect oneself and others from unlawful assault. And the second is the use of direct or indirect force to limit the movement of another person. So defensive is you are saving yourself, and physical intervention is where you are restricting someone else's movement. So maybe you need to escort them out, or maybe they're getting physical, so you restrict their movement, as a team member when you're working as a team. Okay. Right. So what is the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive intervention? So one is restrictive intervention, the other one is non-restrictive intervention. Now, restrictive intervention, let's talk about restrictive interventions first, involve the use of force to limit the movement and freedom of an individual and can involve bodily contact, mechanical devices, or changes to person's environment, such interventions can be highly restrictive that is severely limit the movement and freedom of an individual, or low-level restrictions as well, limit or contain the movement and freedom of an individual who is less resistant with low levels of force. When you come to obviously the class, we will teach you all of that, but just for the theoretical part, you need to understand this. Okay? Right. Now let's move to non-restrictive ones. What are non-restrictive interventions? So non-restrictive interventions allows a greater degree of freedom where the subject is the person who you are restricting, can move away from the physical intervention if they wish to. Now this will include prompting, yeah, asking them to move out, and guiding an individual to assist them walking, also defensive self-protective interventions. These are non-restrictive. So we learned about restrictive and non-restrictive. Now, remember, all physical interventions need to be justified, right? It needs to be justified. You can't just restrict someone's movement. You have to justify that. Physical interventions can result in prosecution of staff, so you can get prosecuted if you cannot justify it. If use of force was unnecessary, excessive, or in any other way unlawful. It can lead to allegations against the staff members and potentially loss of license or employment. Yeah, you need to justify the use of force. Yeah, your force should be proportionate to the threat. You cannot use unlawful force. You have to remember that. You have to follow the training that have been provided in the class, and you cannot unlawfully detain anyone. You're not a police officer. Even police officer, they cannot unlawfully detain someone, but they can detain someone lawfully if they need to, if they have a obviously reason to detain them. Now remember, I told you physical intervention, right? Physical intervention as a last resort. You can use physical intervention, but only as a last resort. Now, what is the last resort? Let's have a look. Last resort is when all other options have failed and are likely to fail, or it's impossible to withdraw. Okay? Used only to protect someone who is in dangerous situation. Disengage or break away from harmful contact as soon as you can, right? Separate yourself and others from a trigger straight away. Physical intervention can be used as a last resort. You cannot use it unless you have exhausted all other options. Okay, it's a last resort. Now, there are some legal implications as well if you use it. What are the legal implications of using physical intervention? PI stands for physical intervention. The authority for security operatives or even those supervisors to use force come from trespass. If someone is there unlawfully, right? Common law. It comes from common law. There are two different types of law: criminal law and common law, right? Criminal law, if you commit a crime against the state. Common law, if you obviously, common law includes case laws, or if you are, if you are on a premises unlawfully, but you are not a threat or you're not committing a crime, then you will be dealt under common law. Self-defense, when you're using physical intervention for self-defense. Breach of peace, okay? The Criminal Law Act and the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act. Now we will go through all of them one by one to see what is it. Okay, let's have a look. Now, trespass. What is trespass? It's under common law. So, for example, let's say you've gone to a field, right, to a farm maybe, right? But you are not committing a crime until you make a threat to someone, or you're damaging their property or plant, or you're damaging, or you are maybe threatening to harm other persons, right? So that's why it's a common law. So a trespass is committed by a person who is improperly on someone else's property without permission or without their consent. Now the law says no more force is used than is necessary to remove the trespasser from the premises. Okay, so for example, if somebody's on your farm or in your property, if you can just escort them out, that's fine. But if they become a threat for you, then obviously you can use the force proportionate to what you are facing, right? So let's say if somebody's holding maybe a baseball bat to hit you, then obviously you have the right to use the proportionate force to stop them from hitting you. Okay, that is what it means. You can't hit someone with anything if they're not a threat. So you can just escort them out. Self-defense. What is self-defense? The rules of self-defense are if any person has an honestly held belief that he, she, or another is an imminent danger, then he, she may use such force as is reasonable and necessary to avert the danger. Okay, that is self-defense. If you have honestly held the belief, if you think that somebody might just harm you or kill someone or do anything, then you can use obviously reasonable force or proportionate force. What is proportionate? Proportionate is the level of threat is high, then you can use the high force. If the level of threat is low, then you can use the lower force. You can't just use excessive force if you think that you're scared or somebody else is scared. So the force that you're going to use will be reasonable or proportionate. Okay, that is self-defense. Now, breach of peace. What is breach of peace? Breach of peace, preventing a breach of peace and saving life. What is breach of peace? Any person may use such force as is reasonable or proportionate in the circumstances to prevent a breach of the peace or save a life. Okay, preventing a breach of peace and saving life. Again, here you can only use reasonable force and you can only use proportionate force. You cannot use excessive force. If you do, you will get prosecuted. Okay. Then there is the Criminal Law Act. Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act 1967. What does it say? The Act gives everyone, including those supervisors, the authority to use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in the prevention of crime or in affecting or assisting in the lawful arrest of offenders, suspected offenders, or persons unlawfully at large. So this act gives the legal powers to anyone, not just the door supervisors, to obviously use the reasonable force to, to arrest the offenders or suspected offenders or persons unlawfully at large. Okay, that's that. And then we have Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008. Now, Section 76, the Criminal Justice and Immigration Act 2008, clarifies the degree or amount of force that may be used under the defense introduced earlier. Now, what they're saying, it states that a person acting for a legitimate purpose means for a legal purpose, may not be able to weigh to a nicety the exact measure of any necessary action. That evidence of persons having only done what the person honestly and instinctively thought was necessary for a legitimate purpose constitutes strong evidence that only reasonable action was taken by that person for that purpose. So again, all the time, The force has to be reasonable or proportionate to the force, or to the threat. You cannot use excessive force. That's not allowed. Now, justification for the use of force. What are the justifications of the use of force? The questions that are likely to be asked about any use of force are, first thing, was there a need to use the force? So you need to justify, was there a need to use the force? Yeah. Was the force applied in good faith or in a malicious way? Good faith is like you wanted to do the right thing. Malicious way is criminal way. Why did you use that? What was the size and the build of the injured party compared to the door supervisor? If somebody is short, they're not built properly, they're not a big person, and you're a big person, you're 6 feet high, and you know, you beat them up or you harm them, then you have to justify that. Why did you do that? At what stage did the door supervisor stop using force? Right? Somebody might just keep on beating them up. Why? Until they were a threat, you can obviously, use the force. But until once they are not a threat, you're not allowed to use any excessive force. Okay. Now, again, justification of the use of force. The question that are likely to be asked about any use of force: was the amount of force reasonable or not? We've done that. What was the extent of injuries compared to the amount of resistance given? Right? So let's say somebody is giving little resistance, but they've got too many injuries. So it means the door supervisor or any other person have used excessive force. Were there any weapons used or threatened by the other party? Right? So the force, so let's say somebody had a baseball bat and then you try to stop them, you can use excessive force. But if the other party was unarmed, they didn't have any weapon, and then you used excessive force, which was not proportionate to the threat, then you can be prosecuted. Now, there is a conflict resolution model, okay, that we can look at. So we look at the behavior, we look at the impact factor, and we look at the response. Let's say somebody is compliant, they're not giving any resistance. Yeah, you need to look at their gender, their age, their size, their strength. Response should be no supervisor's presence, observing, just passive control. You don't need to do anything. Somebody is giving you verbal resistance, refusing to cooperate, swearing, or threatening. Yeah, you need to look at the skills and knowledge, technical communication, verbal and non-verbal. You can talk to them, use the de-escalation strategies. Talk them out, ask them, look, don't need to create any problems. Let's just evacuate. Let's just go out, and that should be it. Then passive resistance, refusing to move or leave. Impact factors could be alcohol, drugs, mental health or impairment. Now you need to use primary control skills, carrying out low level of force, maybe just guiding them. Let's just go out. You don't need to do anything else. No excessive force. Active resistance, pulling or pushing away, struggling. Impact factors that need to be considered: injury, exhaustion, who is at disadvantage. You can use secondary control skills now, increase in force, arms locks, and holds. And these techniques obviously will be taught to you in the class when you come and study with us. Now, behavior: assaultive, aggressive resistance, fighting, punching, kicking. You need to look at the impact factors, how many they are, numbers, weapons, any other dangers. You know, First, you need to use defensive tactics. You can use the blocks. Okay. And then, if there is a serious life threatening resistance, armed or serious attack, risk of serious harm or death, you need to look at the impact factor. If it's a serious imminent danger, what you need to do: serious or deadly use of force, action likely to or could cause serious harm or even death. So the moral of the story is anything that you do has to be proportionate to the level of threat. Okay. Anything that you do has to be proportionate to the level of threat. Now, other legislation, when considering the use of physical intervention in the workplace, those supervisors, also need to ensure that they do not accidentally or recklessly breach any other laws. What is the other law? The main law is Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Now, as a door supervisor, you are responsible to take reasonable care of your own health and safety, right? Ensure that your own acts and omissions do not adversely affect the health and safety of others. Then, as a door supervisor, you must follow health and safety policies provided and keep up to date. Practice safe working habits and obey all safety rules. Use protective equipment properly and be aware of emergency procedures and ensure that they are followed when necessary. Now, majority of these duties, they come from Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, where you have to look after yourself, you have to take reasonable care of yourself and other people around you, who can be affected by your acts and omissions, and you need to cooperate with your employer. How can you cooperate with your employer? By following the policies and procedures, right? This is what you need to do, and that's a legal requirement because it's coming from Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, right? So not just that, not just Health and Safety at Work Act, we have Human Rights Act. Yeah. Now, Human Rights Act's Article 2 gives everyone right to life. Article 3 prohibits anyone from being tortured. Yeah. Article 5 gives us right to liberty and security. Article 6 gives us the right to a fair trial. Article 7, no punishment without the law has been implemented. And Article 14, prohibition on discrimination based on their protected characteristics, gender, age, sex, all of that. Okay. Then the Human Rights Act orders that any use of force used by anyone employed by a statutory body must be necessary to use before they use it, must be reasonable, must be proportionate, must be justifiable, right? And people who are using the force are accountable. What's the difference in being accountable and responsible? Responsibility can be transferred. Like, for example, if I'm a teacher, I can give my responsibility to another teacher. But if I'm accountable, I cannot transfer my accountability to others. Okay? It's not possible to transfer my accountability to other people. It's just not possible. Right? So any force must be necessary to use, reasonable, proportionate, justifiable. You are able to justify why you have used it, right? Because there was no other way out. And accountable, right? Okay. Now we look at RIDDOR. RIDDOR, what is RIDDOR? RIDDOR is, it's a law, reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulation. Now, what is that law? That under such circumstances where there is a fatality, where there is a serious injury, where there is a dangerous occurrence, where there is a over 7 days incapacitation, where there is an occupational ill health or occupational disease, the employers are required by the law to report that to the enforcing authority. That could be a local council or could be health and safety executive themselves, right? So under that regulation, the employer needs to report everything, not everything, in those categories to the enforcing authority. That could be health and safety executive. But your job as a door supervisor is everything, even if it's a near miss, even if it's an accident, even if it's a dangerous occurrence, to report it to your employer so they can follow this law. Okay, so it's a reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulation. Under that law, the employer has to report some certain things to health and safety executive, right? But your job as a door supervisor is to report everything to your employer so they can see whether it needs to go to the enforcing authority or not. Right. So there are other legislations as well, like the Employment Rights Act 1996. Now, Section 44 of the Act protects employees from being disciplined or dismissed if they leave their place of work because they think that they are under attack. It also allows them to take appropriate measures to protect themselves and others from danger. Now, for example, your employer is asking you to do an unsafe act or asking you to work in an unsafe activity, you can say no. Why? Because you're protected under Employment Rights Act 1996. If you do that, or if you want to be a whistleblower, you cannot be frowned upon or victimized because you are protected by the law in Great Britain, the Employment Rights Act 1996. Okay. Now, what do you think can happen if force is used improperly or excessively? Okay. There are professional implications. You might lose your license. It might make a situation worse. Yeah, you may face disciplinary procedures because you haven't followed the right path. Result in the loss of SIA license. Okay, result in the injury or death. Could be anyway. Could be you or could be the third party. There are legal implications. You might be fined or you might go to prison. Could be criminal proceedings against you, your organization, depending upon what circumstances was, or civil actions. You might have to pay compensation to the third party. Yeah, you might have to pay compensation to the third party. So before using any force, you need to think as a supervisor that whatever you are doing is justifiable. Whatever you are doing is proportionate. Whatever you are doing, you will be held accountable for, right? Whatever you are doing is necessary. Yeah, whatever you are doing is necessary, and there is no other way out. Remember, physical intervention is only a last resort. You can only use physical intervention as a last resort. You're not being trained to go out and threaten people. No, as a last resort. Right? Okay. Now, positive alternative to physical intervention. What are the positive alternatives to physical intervention? First of all, we have primary controls. What are primary controls? Following employer's safety and security policy. So if you are following your employer's policy, health and safety policy, you're doing the right thing and it will guide you to do the right thing. Yeah. Procedures and working practices. So if you're following, which is also a legal requirement under Section 7, if primary controls are doing the right thing by following the employer's policies and procedures. Yeah. Use of safety and security equipment and technology, as a deterrence. For example, radios for summoning assistance, CCTV access control, and all of that. These are the primary controls. Okay. If you're doing the right thing, you're following the policies and procedures, most likely things won't go wrong. Okay, these are the primary controls, and this can be tested in the exam. So you need to know what are the primary controls. Following the policies and procedures, yeah, using the equipment, radios, CCTVs, right? Okay, these are the primary controls. Then we have the secondary controls. If the primary controls don't work, positive and effective interpersonal communication, right? You can speak to them nicely. Conflict management skills, right? So positive and effective interpersonal communication and the knowledge and skills of conflict management in reducing the need for physical intervention. So as I said, physical intervention is a last resort. You need to use primary controls and secondary controls first before even thinking of using physical intervention. As I said, it has to be necessary, it has to be justifiable, it has to be reasonable, it has to be proportionate, and you can be held accountable for. You need to be ready for that. Yeah. So we use primary controls, we use secondary controls, and as a last resort, we can use physical intervention skills. We've completed our first topic. So what you need to do now, you need to go and do the multiple choice questions. We will not be repeating this in the class, so you need to make sure the notes have been provided. You can go through the notes and do your multiple choice questions. And when you come to the class, if you've got any questions, you can speak to the trainer or you can speak to myself. Okay, see you in the next video. Thank you very much for attending, and I shall see you in the classroom.